She stood at the altar, tears of sheer humiliation burning her eyes as the groom's wealthy family openly snickered at her slightly faded second-hand gown. They loudly whispered it was a thrift store rag, fit for a beggar, but the cruel laughter died instantly when the deafening roar of military-grade helicopter rotors rattled the church's ancient stained-glass windows. The heavy oak doors blew open, and a royal guard stepped through, holding a velvet box sealed with the Queen's crest. Her rag wasn't a mistake, it was a lost masterpiece. Madeline never wanted a spectacle. A quiet, meticulous art restorer working in a dusty annex of the Victoria and Albert Museum, she was a woman who found beauty in forgotten things. She spent her days carefully removing centuries of grime from oil paintings, bringing lost colors back to vibrant life. She was comfortable in the shadows. Liam Hayes, however, lived entirely in the sun. Liam was the golden boy of London's financial district, a hedge fund manager, whose family lineage could be traced back to the industrial barons of the 19th century. The Hayes family didn't just have money, they had influence estates in the Cotswolds and a social circle that regularly rubbed shoulders with minor royalty. When Liam proposed to Madeline in a quiet garden in Kyoto, she said yes because she loved the man. She had profoundly underestimated the terrifying machine that was his family. From the moment the engagement ring, a flawless 5-carat heirloom sapphire, slipped onto Madeline's finger, the Hayes matriarch Victoria launched a campaign of psychological warfare. Victoria Hayes was a woman constructed entirely of sharp angles, icy glares, and condescension masked as concern. To Victoria, Madeline was an interloper, a commoner dragging mud onto the Hayes family's priceless Persian rugs. "We simply must discuss your dress, Madeline," Victoria had announced over high tea at the Ritz, her voice loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. "Given your modest background, I assume you'll need financial assistance. I will not have my son standing at Sudeley Castle next to a bride, looking like she wandered in from a high-street discount rack. We shall go to Alexander McQueen or Vivienne Westwood. I will write the check, and you will simply stand there and let them fix you." Madeline's face had burned. "I can buy my own dress, Victoria," she had replied softly but firmly. Victoria had simply smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of her lips. "We shall see." The pressure of finding a gown that fit the Hayes family's impossible standards on a museum restorer's salary was crushing. Madeline spent weekends scouring London. She visited boutique after boutique, looking at price tags that equaled a year of her rent. She felt entirely out of place among the silk, the champagne, and the pitying looks of the sales assistants when she tentatively mentioned her budget. It was on a rainy Tuesday evening, seeking refuge from a sudden London downpour, that Madeline ducked into a high-end Oxfam charity shop nestled in the affluent neighborhood of Chelsea, just off the King's Road. The shop was a treasure trove of wealthy cast-offs, designer coats worn once, vintage leather boots, and racks of evening wear donated by socialites clearing out their seasonal wardrobes. Drawn to the back of the store, Madeline noticed a heavy garment bag tucked away behind a rack of winter coats. It was unmarked, smelling faintly of cedar and aged silk. Curiosity getting the better of her restorer's instincts, she unzipped it. Inside hung a wedding dress that took the breath straight from her lungs. It was not a modern, crystal-encrusted gown. It was a long-sleeved, heavy ivory silk masterpiece. The fabric was slightly yellowed with age, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. It featured a sweetheart neckline overlaid with the most delicate, intricate Honiton lace Madeline had ever seen. The seed pearls hand-stitched into the bodice caught the dim light of the shop. It was heavily structured, meant to carry the weight of tradition. Madeline ran her practiced fingers over the seams. The stitching was entirely done by hand. The inner lining was a soft, pale blush pink, and near the hem, almost completely faded, was a tiny hand-embroidered crest. It looked like a small crown above the initials E.R. "Ah, you found the ghost." The elderly shop manager, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, "No, a woman named Mrs. Gable. Wait, a woman named Mrs. Hudson," said warmly, shuffling over. "That came in last week. Estate clearance from an old manor house out near Windsor. No one wants it. The modern girls want skin and sequins." They say it looks like an antique curtain. How much? Madeline whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know why, but the dress felt alive beneath her hands. For you love 50 quid. It's taking up too much space. 50 pounds. For a dress that felt heavier than history. Madeline bought it immediately, shielding the bulky garment bag from the rain as she ran to the tube station. She felt a strange thrill, a secret victory, against Victoria's suffocating expectations. She had a dress. It needed work, careful cleaning, a bit of taking in, but she was an expert at restoration. She would bring this masterpiece back to life. She didn't know that bringing the dress back to life would nearly destroy her wedding. When Madeline finally revealed to the Hayes family that she had procured her own dress, the silence in Victoria's drawing room was absolute. "You bought it?" Victoria asked, her teacup pausing halfway to her mouth. Seated next to her on the velvet sofa was Evelyn Crawford. Evelyn was Liam's childhood friend, a stunning, aristocratic blonde who Victoria had desperately wanted Liam to marry. Evelyn looked at Madeline with a mixture of amusement and deep pity. "Yes," Madeline said proudly. "It's a vintage piece. The craftsmanship is incredible. I've been restoring the silk myself." Evelyn let out a sudden sharp laugh, clapping a hand over her mouth. "Oh, Maddie, you're joking. You are going to wear a used dress to the Hayes wedding. Are you seriously going to walk down the aisle in some dead woman's sweat?" Liam, sitting across the room, frowned. "Evie, knock it off. If Maddie loves it, that's what matters." "Liam, darling, be sensible," Victoria snapped, setting her cup down with a harsh clatter. "A vintage piece she is restoring. It sounds like a biohazard. Madeline, I insist you bring this garment to Madame Cecile in Mayfair. She has handled the Hayes family alterations for 3 decades. If you are determined to wear this thrift store rag, I will at least ensure it is professionally fumigated and tailored so you don't embarrass us all." Not wanting to cause a fracture between Liam and his mother, a month before the wedding, Madeline agreed. The following Thursday, Madeline found herself standing on a velvet pedestal in the center of Madame Cecile's opulent mirrored studio. Victoria and Evelyn sat on a plush sofa, sipping champagne and watching with predatory smiles as the assistant unzipped Madeline's garment bag. When the heavy ivory silk dress was pulled out, the reaction was immediate. "Good heavens," Victoria gasped, physically recoiling. "It's yellow. Madeline, it looks like a tea-stained bedsheet." "It's just the natural aging of raw silk," Madeline defended quietly. "It has a beautiful patina. It looks like it smells of mothballs and poverty," Evelyn sneered, swirling her champagne. "Liam is going to be photographed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, and you're going to look like Miss Havisham dragging herself out of the attic." Madame Cecile, a severe French woman with a tape measure draped around her neck, stepped forward, her face completely unreadable. She put on a pair of white cotton gloves before touching the fabric. As Madame Cecile examined the bodice, her fingers froze. She traced the intricate lacework, her eyes narrowing. She turned the dress inside out, examining the corset structure, the boning, and the faint, pale pink lining. When she found the tiny faded ER crest near the hem, she let out a sharp, involuntary gasp and took a step back, dropping her tape measure. "Madame," Victoria asked, annoyed, "can you fix this disaster or not? Perhaps bleach it?" Madame Cecile looked at Victoria, then at Madeline, her hands actually trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but then her eyes darted to the terrifying judgmental glare of Victoria Hayes. The tailor swallowed hard, her professional mask slamming back into place. I can tailor it, Madame Hayes," Cecile said softly, her voice strained, "but I will not apply bleach. It would be a crime to the fabric." "Fine," Victoria sighed dramatically. "Just make sure it doesn't fall apart when she walks. I've already alerted the society photographers that the bride is insisting on a bohemian vintage look to manage expectations. Honestly, Madeline, you are testing my limits." Throughout the fitting, Madame Cecile barely spoke, but Madeline noticed how gently the woman pinned the fabric, treating the dress with a reverence that bordered on worship. As Madeline was changing back into her street clothes, Madame Cecile leaned in close, her voice a hushed whisper. "Miss Madeline, where did you find this?" "A charity shop in Chelsea," Madeline whispered back. "Why?" The The tailor closed her eyes for a brief second. You are a very brave woman to wear this into a family like that. Guard this dress. Do not let anyone near it. Do you understand me? Madeleine left the studio, feeling a cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. What was wrong with the dress but the constant stream of Evelyn's snide texts and Victoria's demanding emails pushed the mystery to the back of her mind. She had a wedding to survive. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in the kind of flawless, crisp English sunshine that money usually couldn't buy, though Victoria Hayes certainly acted as if she had rented the weather herself. The venue was a sprawling historic estate near Gloucestershire, complete with manicured topiary gardens and a 12th-century stone chapel. The atmosphere in the bridal suite, however, was toxic. Madeleine sat rigidly in front of the vanity mirror as a makeup artist worked on her face. Behind her, her bridesmaids, a mix of Liam's cousins and Evelyn, who Victoria had essentially forced Madeleine to include, were drinking mimosas and speaking loudly, making no effort to hide their conversations. I still can't believe she didn't just let Victoria buy her a Vera Wang, a cousin muttered, applying lipstick. It's honestly an insult. It's like she's trying to show off how frugal she is. Frugal is one word for it. Evelyn laughed sharply. Cheap is another. I saw the dress at the fitting. I promise you when she walks down the aisle, Liam is going to realize exactly what he's marrying. You can dress a commoner in silk, but if the silk is from a literal dumpster, the joke writes itself. Madeleine closed her eyes, fighting back the sting of tears. She focused on Liam. She focused on the way he smiled at her when no one else was around. That was real. This circus wasn't. It is time to get dressed, Miss. Madame Cecile's assistant, who had been dispatched to help with the delicate gown, said softly. As Madeleine stepped into the heavy silk, she felt the familiar weight of it settle over her when the assistant fastened the dozens of tiny silk-covered buttons up her back. Madeleine turned to face the full-length mirror. The room went completely silent. The dress had been masterfully tailored. It hugged Madeleine's waist perfectly before cascading down into a heavy, dramatic train. The lace over her collarbones framed her face like a Renaissance portrait. Against the opulent modern luxury of the bridal suite, Madeleine looked like a ghost from a more elegant era, striking regal and entirely breathtaking. But Evelyn, recovering quickly from her initial shock, shattered the silence. Well, Evelyn drawled, looking Madeleine up and down. It definitely looks old. Did you remember to put on deodorant? You know how vintage fabrics hold on to sweat. A few of the cousins stifled giggles. It's time, the wedding planner barked, sticking her head into the room. Guests are seated. Groom is at the altar. Bridal party line up. Madeleine's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she walked out of the estate and toward the ancient stone chapel. She could hear the string quartet playing softly inside. As she stood in the vestibule, waiting for her cue, Victoria approached. Liam's mother was dripping in diamonds, her face a mask of pinched disapproval. She stepped uncomfortably close to Madeleine. This is your last chance, Victoria hissed venomously, under the guise of adjusting Madeleine's veil. When you walk through those doors, my entire social circle will see what my son has tied himself to. They will smile at you, but they will be laughing. They know what that dress is. A cheap, dirty secret. Do not trip Madeleine. Do not give them more ammunition. Before Madeleine could respond, the heavy wooden doors swung open. The bridal chorus began to play. Madeleine gripped her bouquet of white roses so tightly, her knuckles turned white, and stepped into the light of the chapel. The church was packed with London's elite. Men in immaculate mourning suits, women in elaborate fascinators. As Madeleine began her long walk down the aisle, the whispers started. They weren't even trying to hide it. She saw a woman in the second row lean over to her husband, behind a gloved hand, her eyes raking over Madeleine's slightly yellowed lace. She saw Evelyn standing near the altar, smirking openly. She saw Victoria standing in the front row, radiating absolute humiliation and rage. But Madeleine kept her eyes locked on Liam. He stood at the altar, his eyes wide, looking at her with an expression of absolute awe. He didn't see a dirty secret. He saw his bride. She reached the altar, taking Liam's hands. His grip was warm and steady. You look Liam breathed. "You look like a queen." The priest opened his book, clearing his throat to begin the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." He was interrupted by a low, rhythmic thrumming sound. At first, the guests thought it was thunder. People glanced nervously up at the arched stone ceiling, but the sound grew louder, vibrating through the ancient floorboards, shaking the wooden pews. The stained glass windows began to rattle violently in their lead frames. Thwack, 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 thwack. "What on earth is that?" Victoria demanded, breaking decorum and turning around in her pew. The noise was deafening now, drowning out the murmurs of the panicked crowd. It was the unmistakable, terrifying roar of heavy helicopter rotors, and it sounded like it was landing directly on the manicured lawn outside the church doors. Wind whipped violently against the church, tearing leaves from the trees and slamming them against the glass. The string quartet stopped playing, clutching their instruments in terror. Liam pulled Madeline close, shielding her. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel burst open. The bright afternoon sunlight flooded in, silhouetting a figure stepping out of the chaos of the wind. The guests gasped, some standing up in sheer shock. It was a man in the full, immaculate ceremonial uniform of the Royal Guard, scarlet tunic, gold braiding, white gloves. He marched down the center aisle with terrifying precision, his boots echoing sharply against the stone floor, despite the dying roar of the helicopter engines outside. The entire church held its breath. Victoria Hayes looked as if she were about to faint. The guard stopped at the foot of the altar, snapping a crisp salute to Liam and Madeline. Then, with practiced reverence, he lowered his arms to present a polished mahogany box inlaid with gold. On top of the box was a heavy wax seal, the unmistakable crest of Buckingham Palace. For the bride, on the strict orders of Her Majesty, the guard boomed, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Madeline stared at the box, her hands trembling as she reached out to accept it. The mocking whispers of the Hayes family were completely, utterly gone. The silence inside the ancient stone chapel was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. A moment before, the air had been thick with the venomous, muffled laughter of London's elite, all of them thoroughly enjoying the perceived humiliation of the bride. Now you could hear a pin drop on the 12th century flagstones. The only sound was the distant, fading mechanical whine of the military helicopter powering down on the manicured lawns outside. A stark, modern intrusion against the historical sanctity of the venue. Madeline stood frozen at the altar. Her hands encased in the delicate, slightly yellowed lace of her sleeves hovered mid-air. She stared at the polished mahogany box presented to her by the rigidly saluting Royal Guard. The wood of the box gleamed under the warm amber light, filtering through the stained glass. The thick crimson wax seal on the lid, bearing the undeniable, deeply pressed crest of Buckingham Palace, seemed to glow with an intimidating authority. I don't understand," Madeline whispered, her voice barely carrying past the first row of pews. She looked up at the guardsman. His face was a mask of perfect, disciplined stoicism, his eyes fixed dead ahead. He did not blink. He did not flinch. He simply held the heavy box forward, waiting for her to accept the burden of its contents. Liam, sensing her sheer paralyzing shock, stepped closer. He wrapped his warm, strong hand around her waist, anchoring her to the present moment. "Take it, Maddie," he murmured softly, his own voice laced with a mixture of profound confusion and awe. "It's for you." Trembling violently, Madeline reached out. The moment her fingertips brushed the polished mahogany, a collective involuntary gasp rippled through the congregation. In the front row, Victoria Hayes looked as though she had been struck by lightning. The matriarch's aristocratic face, usually so composed and judgmental, was completely drained of color, her mouth slightly ajar, exposing the expensive dental work she so often bared in condescending smiles. Beside her, Evelyn Crawford was entirely motionless, the smug, mocking sneer she had worn since the bridal suite, wiped completely from her features, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Madeline took the box. It was surprisingly heavy, With Liam's hands gently supporting hers from beneath, she brought it close to her chest. "Open it, miss," the guardsman stated, his voice ringing with the clipped, undeniable authority of the British military. It was not a request. Madeline swallowed hard. She wedged her thumb under the edge of the heavy crimson wax. With a sharp, distinct crack that echoed off the vaulted stone ceiling, the seal broke. She lifted the mahogany lid. The interior of the box was lined with midnight blue crushed velvet. Resting on top of the velvet was a thick, cream-colored envelope made of heavy parchment paper. The royal letterhead was embossed in shimmering gold ink at the top, but it was what lay beneath the envelope that made Madeline's breath catch in her throat. Nestled in the custom-fitted velvet grooves was a piece of jewelry so magnificent, so steeped in historical weight, that it seemed to capture and refract every ounce of light in the chapel. It was a tiara, but not a modern, gaudy piece of heavily manufactured wealth. It was an antique, intricate framework of platinum, designed as a series of delicate, sweeping crescents, each one densely packed with brilliant cut diamonds. At the center of each crescent rested a massive, flawless rose-cut diamond that seemed to pulse with an inner fire. "Good God!" the priest whispered, completely abandoning his liturgical composure, leaning over his pulpit to stare at the jewels. "That is the Tech Crescent Tiara." Whispers erupted like a shock wave through the pews. The Tech Crescent Tiara was a legendary piece of royal history, a diadem that had belonged to Princess Mary Adelaide, Duchess of Teck, before being passed down through generations of queens. It was not something that was simply loaned out to the public. It was a crown jewel, locked deep within the royal vaults, seen only in historical portraits and occasional, highly exclusive state banquets. Madeline couldn't speak. She picked up the heavy parchment envelope with shaking fingers. "Read it," Liam urged softly, his eyes darting between the priceless diamonds and the stunned face of his bride. "Maddie, you have to read it." She tried to open the flap, but her hands were trembling too violently. The thick paper rattled in her grip. Seeing her struggle, Liam gently took the envelope from her hands. He slid his finger under the flap, pulled out the thick folded stationery, and opened it. He cleared his throat. The entire congregation leaned forward collectively, desperate to hear. Even Victoria Hayes had leaned so far forward, she was nearly falling out of her mahogany pew. Liam stood tall beside Madeline, holding the royal stationery. As his eyes scanned the handwritten script, his expression shifted from deep confusion to utter profound shock. He looked at Madeline, then down at the dress she was wearing, the dress his mother and friends had so relentlessly mocked as a thrift store rag. "Maddie," Liam breathed, his voice breaking slightly. He looked up at the crowd, his gaze landing squarely on his mother in the front row. He raised the letter and began to read aloud, his voice steady and projecting clearly through the silent church. "Dear Madeline, it has been brought to my attention by my most trusted senior dresser, Angela Kelly, that a piece of my personal history, long thought to be lost to the ravages of time, has miraculously found its way to you on your wedding day. In the bitter winter of 1947, as this nation was recovering from the profound devastation of the Second World War, my wedding to Prince Philip was meant to be a beacon of hope. Yet, we were bound by the same strict rationing rules as every citizen. My primary wedding gown was entrusted to the brilliant Sir Norman Hartnell. However, what the history books do not record is that my father, King George VI, and his private secretary, Sir Alan Tommy Lascelles, secretly commissioned a second backup gown. This was a precaution against any unforeseen disaster or damage to the primary dress during those fragile times. Sir Norman constructed this backup gown using heavily restricted beautiful raw silk, hand-embroidering it with Honiton lace and seed pearls. Because it was a state secret, constructed off the official books, it bore only a tiny discreet monogram near the hem, E.R. Elizabeth Regina. When the wedding proceeded flawlessly, the backup gown was hidden away to avoid public backlash regarding wartime austerity. It was eventually given in strict confidence to a deeply trusted friend of the Crown Lady Pamela for safekeeping at her country estate. Upon her passing, it seems the estate clearance was handled with profound carelessness, and this secret masterpiece was accidentally donated to a charity shop. A former apprentice of the Hartnell atelier, a Madame Cecile, who I understand you recently visited for alterations, immediately recognized the unique hand-stitching and the hidden cipher. She fulfilled her duty and contacted the palace immediately, sending photographs of you wearing the garment during your fitting. When I saw the photographs, I was deeply moved to see the craftsmanship of Sir Norman brought back to life, worn with such grace by a woman who clearly understands the value of history and restoration, brought tears to my eyes. My staff offered to dispatch agents to retrieve the dress. I forbade it. A dress crafted with such love, designed to celebrate the beginning of a lifelong union, should not spend another 70 years locked in a dark archive. It is meant to be worn. It is meant to see the light of a wedding day. Therefore, Madeleine, it is my absolute pleasure to officially gift you this gown. It is no longer a forgotten relic. It is yours. Officer, furthermore, to complete the vision that Sir Norman Hartnell intended all those decades ago, I have arranged for the temporary loan of the Tech Crescent tiara to be worn today as you walk down the aisle. Hold your head high. You carry the history of a queen today. With warmest wishes for your marriage, Elizabeth R. As Liam finished reading the signature, the silence in the chapel shattered. It was not a gentle resumption of noise, but an explosion of gasps, panicked whispers, and the frantic shifting of fabrics. Madeleine stood completely stunned, the words washing over her like a tidal wave. She looked down at the heavy, slightly yellowed silk of her skirt. The faint smell of cedar and age was no longer the scent of poverty, as Evelyn had so cruelly claimed. It was the scent of a hidden royal vault. It was the scent of 1947. The faded ER at the hem wasn't a random monogram. It was the mark of the reigning monarch. She looked at the guardsman. He stepped forward gently, breaking his rigid stance just enough to carefully lift the priceless Tech Crescent tiara from its velvet bed. "May I, miss?" he asked quietly, his voice losing its military bark, replacing it with a gentle, reverent tone. Madeleine nodded, tears of sheer, overwhelming emotion finally spilling over her eyelashes and tracking through her makeup. She bowed her head slightly. The guardsman reached up expertly, securing the heavy platinum and diamond diadem into her elegantly swept-up hair. As the tiara settled onto her head, she felt the physical weight of millions of pounds of diamonds and the historical weight of a century of royalty. She raised her head. The diamonds caught the light of the stained glass, casting refracted rainbows across the stone walls of the chapel. Liam looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You really are a queen," he whispered. In the front row, Victoria Hayes had physically collapsed back into the wooden pew. Her hands were shaking violently as she clutched her expensive designer handbag. All the blood had rushed from her face, leaving her looking gray and suddenly very old. She had spent the last 6 months torturing Madeleine, mocking her background, and specifically targeting this dress as a symbol of Madeleine's unworthiness. She had invited the highest echelons of London society to witness what she thought would be a pathetic display of poverty. Instead, she had just aggressively and publicly mocked a priceless royal artifact personally gifted by the Queen of England. Evelyn Crawford looked physically ill. The aristocratic blonde who had sneered that the dress looked like some dead woman's sweat and a biohazard was now staring at the floor, realizing that her cruel words had likely been overheard by half the congregation, a congregation that included lords, dukes, and individuals directly connected to the palace. Her social standing was evaporating before her very eyes. The priest, recovering his wits with a monumental effort, cleared his throat loudly. "Well," he said, his voice trembling slightly, I believe we have a wedding to finish." The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of surreal, elevated tension. When Liam and Madeleine finally shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the applause that erupted from the pews was deafening, frantic, and entirely desperate. The very same guests who had been whispering behind their gloved hands 20 minutes earlier were now clapping so hard, their palms turned red, desperately, trying to signal their absolute approval of the bride. As the bridal march played and Madeline and Liam walked back down the aisle, the sea of faces had transformed. The mocking smirks were gone, replaced by expressions of sheer awe and terrified reverence. Madeline walked with her head held high, the tech crescent tiara glittering fiercely, the heavy historic silk of the Queen's secret gown sweeping across the ancient stones. She felt invincible. The reception was held at Sudeley Castle, a sprawling, opulent estate that Victoria Hayes had rented at an astronomical cost to show off her wealth. But as the guests arrived, the atmosphere was completely inverted. Sudeley Castle felt small compared to the magnitude of the Buckingham Palace intervention. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that it left the Hayes family scrambling in the dirt. During the cocktail hour in the castle's grand gallery, Madeline was swarmed. Lords and ladies, prominent politicians and hedge fund billionaires, the exact people who had sneered at her mere hours ago, were now practically fighting each other to bow to her, to compliment the exquisite historical patina of the silk, and to ask breathless questions about her connection to Her Majesty. Madeline handled them all with the calm, quiet grace she had honed working in the museum. She didn't gloat. She simply smiled and thanked them, which only made them grovel harder. Victoria Hayes, however, could not handle the shift. Desperate to reclaim her position at the top of the social hierarchy, she began intercepting guests, holding her champagne glass in a white-knuckle grip. "Yes, well, of course I knew," Madeline heard Victoria loudly declaring to a group of minor royals near the ice sculpture. "I have an exceptional eye for antiques. When Madeline showed it to me, I instantly recognized the Honiton lace. I insisted she wear it. I told her, 'Madeline, darling, this is a museum piece. You simply must wear it to honor the family.'" Madeline stopped walking. Liam, standing beside her, stiffened. He looked at his mother, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. Before Madeline could say a word, Liam stepped away from her and strode directly into the center of the room. He walked up to the microphone stand set up for the evening's toasts, grabbed the mic, and tapped it sharply. The harsh feedback squeal instantly silenced the sprawling room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Liam said, his voice cold and commanding, echoing off the castle walls, "I think it's time for the first toast." Victoria smiled proudly, raising her glass, assuming her son was about to sing her praises for hosting such an elite event. "Today," Liam began, his eyes scanning the crowd of wealthy socialites, "has been a day of profound revelations. I married the love of my life, a woman whose brilliance, dedication, and heart far exceed anyone I have ever known." He paused, and his gaze locked directly onto his mother. The room grew uncomfortably still. "But I also learned a harsh lesson today about the people in this room." Liam continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet register. "For the past 6 months, my wife has endured a campaign of cruelty and snobbery from my own family and from many of you standing here right now." Victoria's proud smile shattered. She lowered her glass, her eyes darting frantically around the room. "Liam, darling, please," she hissed under her breath. "No, mother," Liam said into the microphone, his voice sharp like cracking ice. "Let's tell the truth. You laughed at her. You mocked her background. You mocked her salary. And most of all, you relentlessly mocked the beautiful dress she chose to wear today. You called it trash. You called it a biohazard. You tried to force her to change because you were terrified of what your shallow friends would think." The silence in the grand gallery was absolute. Guests stared at their shoes, their faces burning with shame. Evelyn Crawford, standing near the bar, looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "You pride yourselves on your class, your heritage, and your supposed superior taste." Liam spat, his disgust palpable. "But when true history, true craftsmanship, and a literal priceless artifact was placed right in front of your faces, none of you recognized it. Because you only value things that have a massive modern price tag attached to them. You couldn't recognize royalty if it wasn't branded by a designer." He looked back at Madeline, his expression softening instantly into absolute adoration. Madeline saw the beauty in that dress before she knew what it was. Liam said softly, though the microphone carried his devotion to every corner of the room. Oh, she loved it for its craftsmanship, not its status. That is true class. That is grace. And that is why the Queen of England recognized her worth, while my own family failed to do so. Liam raised his glass high. To my wife, he declared, the only person in this room worthy of wearing a crown. To Madeline, a few of the guests quickly echoed their voices, shaking with desperate eagerness to align themselves with Liam and the palace's new favorite. Victoria Hayes stood completely isolated. The crowd physically backed away from her, terrified that her social contagion would infect them. She had been publicly utterly destroyed by her own son, stripped of her pretenses, and exposed as a shallow, ignorant bully. She set her champagne glass down on a passing waiter's tray, with a trembling hand turned on her heel, and practically fled the grand gallery, unable to face the judging eyes of the high society she so desperately worshipped. Evelyn Crawford didn't even stay for the dinner. She was seen 30 minutes later, crying hysterically as she waited for her driver at the front gates of Sudeley Castle, completely iced out by every guest she tried to speak to. Madeline stood, watching the chaos unfold, the tech crescent tiara resting perfectly on her head. She didn't feel angry anymore. She just felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She looked down at the soft, historical silk of her skirt, running her fingers over the faded ER at the hem. She had saved the dress, but in the end, the dress had saved her. The morning after the wedding at Sudeley Castle did not break with the gentle romantic calm that most newlyweds experience. Instead, it arrived with the explosive, inescapable force of a media hurricane. By 6 a.m., the exclusive, heavily guarded gates of the Gloucestershire estate were besieged. News vans from the BBC, Sky News, and every major tabloid in the United Kingdom had gridlocked the narrow country lanes. Telephoto lenses were aimed like sniper rifles at the castle windows. The story of the thrift shop queen had leaked with astonishing speed. Given the sheer number of furious, embarrassed, and gossip-hungry aristocrats who had attended the reception, confidentiality was an absolute impossibility. Inside the master bridal suite, Madeline and Liam lay wrapped in heavy down comforters, staring in stunned silence at the television screen. Liam had muted the volume, but the scrolling ticker at the bottom of the screen screamed the reality of their situation. Royal intervention at high society wedding. Hedge fund matriarch humiliated after mocking queen's hidden gown. On the bed spread between them lay a mountain of Sunday papers, hastily delivered by a terrified hotel concierge. The front page of the Sunday Times featured a massive high-definition photograph of Madeline standing at the altar. The image was breathtaking. The amber light of the chapel caught the flawless diamonds of the tech crescent tiara, casting a halo around her head, while the heavy historical silk of the 1947 Hartnell gown flowed around her like liquid ivory. But it was the headline that made Liam's jaw clench tightly. The Fall of Snobbery. Victoria Hayes's disastrous campaign against her new daughter-in-law exposed. I didn't want this, Madeline whispered, pulling the duvet tighter around her shoulders. Oh, she traced the edge of the newspaper with a trembling finger. I just wanted to marry you. I wanted to wear a dress that I felt connected to. I never wanted to destroy your mother publicly. Liam turned to her, his expression a mixture of fierce protection and unyielding resolve. He reached out gently, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. You didn't destroy her, Maddie. Her own arrogance destroyed her. For 6 months she dug a pit, filled it with venom, and waited to push you in. Why? Yesterday the palace simply handed her a mirror. She fell into her own trap. He picked up a copy of the Daily Mail, which had dedicated 6 pages to a blistering expose on the Hayes family's new money desperation, compared to Madeline's quiet, historic grace. Look at this, Liam said, tossing the paper aside. Oh, Evelyn Crawford has apparently deleted all her social media accounts and fled to her family's chalet in Gstaad. The financial backers of my mother's charity board have called an emergency meeting to distance themselves from the PR disaster. They worship status, Maddie, And yesterday they insulted the ultimate status. They insulted the crown. Before Madeline could process the sheer scale of the fallout, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed at the heavy oak doors of their suite. Liam rose, pulling on a thick terry cloth robe, and opened the door. Standing in the hallway, flanked by two immense castle security guards, was a sharply dressed man in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes," the man said, bowing his head slightly. "I am Thomas, private courier for the Royal Collection Trust. I have been instructed to deliver this directly into the hands of the bride." Madeline stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs, just as it had in the chapel. She took the envelope. It was identical to the one the guardsman had delivered yesterday, heavy parchment embossed with the gold royal crest. She opened it with far steadier hands this time. "Dear Madeline, the events of yesterday have certainly caused quite a stir in the morning press. Please do not let the noise of the media detract from the joy of your union. Given your professional expertise as an art restorer at the Victoria and Albert Museum and your clear, reverent understanding of historical textiles, the Royal Collection Trust requests your presence at Buckingham Palace this coming Tuesday. We wish to formally document the gown's journey, discuss its permanent preservation, and perhaps, if you are willing, explore a unique professional opportunity regarding its future display. Angela Kelly will meet you at the East Gate at 10 o'clock. Madeline read the letter twice, her breath catching in her throat. Angela Kelly, the Queen's personal advisor, curator, and senior dresser. In the world of fashion history and royal archiving, Angela Kelly was a titan. "They want me to come to the palace," Madeline breathed, looking up at Liam. "Not just to return the tiara. They want to talk to me about the dress, professionally." Tuesday morning arrived with a crisp, clear London chill. The media frenzy had only intensified, with paparazzi swarming the Hayes' townhouse in Kensington. Liam had arranged for a private tinted car to slip them out through a neighbor's underground garage. As the black sedan pulled up to the imposing wrought iron east gate of Buckingham Palace, the armed guards checked their credentials before waving them through the massive archways into the quadrangle. Waiting for them in the private hushed corridors of the royal apartments was Angela Kelly herself. She was a woman of sharp, observant eyes, dressed impeccably, radiating an aura of absolute competence and fiercely guarded loyalty. "Mrs. Hayes," Angela said warmly, extending a hand. "And Mr. Hayes, congratulations on your wedding. I must say you made quite the entrance into high society." "Thank you, Ms. Kelly," Madeline replied, feeling a flush of heat in her cheeks. "Though I assure you the drama was entirely unintentional." Angela offered a knowing, slightly wicked smile. "Oh, my dear, the palace has survived centuries of drama. A little dust-up with the Chelsea set is nothing. Please come with me. We have much to discuss." She led them deep into the bowels of the palace, past the glittering staterooms, and into a secure, climate-controlled wing that few members of the public ever saw. This was the heart of the Royal Collection Trust's Textile Conservation Department. The air smelled of clean linen, specialized solvents, and history. In the center of a massive, sterile white room, resting on a sprawling, padded conservation table, was the gown. It had been carefully transported from Sudeley Castle the night before. Under the brilliant, color-correcting fluorescent lights of the lab, the exquisite details of Sir Norman Hartnell's secret masterpiece were starkly visible. "It is a miracle it survived in this condition," Angela said, tracing her gloved fingers inches above the seed pearls. When Madame Cécile sent the photographs of the hidden ER cipher, we tore through the 1947 archival ledgers. We found a single handwritten note from Sir Alan Lascelles, the King's private secretary, authorizing a requisition of raw silk under a false project name. It was labeled Project Citadel. A backup gown for the princess. In case the primary dress was compromised, a closely guarded state secret. Angela turned to Madeline, her eyes calculating and sharp. "You bought it for £50, I understand." "Yes," Madeline said quietly. "In an Oxfam, they thought it was a stained theater costume. And instead of bleaching it, instead of ripping it apart to modernize it, as so many young brides would have done, you respected the patina. You recognized the Honiton lace. You treated it with the reverence it deserved before you even knew who it belonged to." Angela crossed her arms. Her Majesty was profoundly touched by that. That is why she intervened. "She does not reward vanity, Mrs. Hayes. She rewards character." Angela gestured to the sprawling conservation facility around them. "You are currently a junior restorer at the V&A Annex, correct?" "Yes," Madeline nodded, bewildered. "Not anymore," Angela stated flatly. "The Royal Collection Trust is launching a new deeply personal exhibition next year. It will focus on the Crown's resilience during the post-war rationing era. This dress, Project Citadel, will be the absolute centerpiece. I need a lead curator who understands both the technical chemistry of mid-century silk preservation and the emotional weight of the garment." Angela extended a thick, leather-bound dossier toward Madeline. "I want you to lead the exhibition, Madeline. I want you to head the full restoration of this gown, right here in the Palace Labs." Madeline stared at the dossier, her vision blurring with sudden, overwhelming tears. For years she had toiled in the dusty, forgotten corners of the museum world, her passion for history mocked by her husband's ultra-wealthy, forward-looking family. Now she was being offered the pinnacle of her profession by the Crown itself. She looked at Liam. He was beaming, his chest puffed out with a fierce, unwavering pride. He nodded once. "I would be honored, Miss Kelly," Madeline said, her voice steadying. "I would be absolutely honored." The ensuing months were a period of intense, consuming, and deeply fulfilling work for Madeline. She took an official leave of absence from the V&A and was granted a high-security clearance pass to Buckingham Palace. She spent her days in the pristine, temperature-controlled quiet of the textile conservation labs, dressed in a white lab coat, surgical gloves, and specialized magnifying loupes strapped to her forehead. The restoration of the Hartnell gown was a painstakingly delicate process. The raw silk, while structurally sound, had accumulated decades of microscopic dust and environmental pollutants during its forgotten years at Lady Pamela's estate and the charity shop. Madeline employed the most advanced, gentle techniques known to conservation science. She used specialized sable hair brushes to lift particulate matter from the intricate crevices of the Honiton lace. She utilized localized ultrasonic humidification to relax the harsh, set-in creases of the heavy train. It was meditative, solitary work, a stark contrast to the chaotic, venomous social world she had been dragged into during her engagement. While Madeline was ascending to the absolute zenith of her career, Victoria Hayes was experiencing a catastrophic freefall. The social exile of the Hayes matriarch was absolute and unforgiving. High society is a fragile, ruthless ecosystem built entirely on perception and proximity to power. Once the palace had publicly signaled their favor toward Madeline, Victoria was instantly classified as a radioactive liability. Invitations to the charity galas she used to chair simply stopped arriving. Her regular table at the Wolseley was suddenly permanently booked. When she walked through the luxury boutiques of Mayfair, the managers who used to greet her by name now busied themselves in the back rooms, leaving junior associates to handle her with polite, icy brevity. Desperation is a powerful motivator. Victoria hired 3 separate crisis PR firms, but they all told her the same thing. "You cannot spin an insult to the Queen. You must publicly apologize to your daughter-in-law, and you must do it on her terms." Thus began Victoria's relentless, pathetic campaign to buy her way back into Madeline's graces. It started with flowers. Massive, ostentatious arrangements of white orchids began arriving at Liam and Madeline's townhouse daily. Liam threw them directly into the recycling bins. Then came the gifts, a vintage Cartier watch, a deed to a small cottage in the Cotswolds, all returned via Liam's solicitors with a terse, legally binding cease and desist letter. Finally, Victoria attempted to ambush them. It was a rainy Thursday evening. Madeline and Liam had just finished dinner at a quiet, unpretentious Italian restaurant in Soho. As they stepped out onto the wet pavement, a black Bentley pulled up aggressively to the curb. The rear door flew open, and Victoria stepped out into the drizzle, looking noticeably thinner and frantic. "Liam, Madeline, please wait," Victoria cried out, her voice stripped of its usual aristocratic drawl, replaced by a shrill panic. Liam immediately stepped in front of Madeline, shielding her. "Get back in the car, Mother. Please, you must listen to me," Victoria pleaded, ignoring the rain ruining her silk blouse. She looked at Madeline, her eyes wide, glassy, and terrified. "Madeline, I am so sorry. I was blind, I was foolish. I have made a massive donation to the V&A in your name. £500,000. I've spoken to the board. They are willing to name a wing after you." Madeline looked at the woman who had made the happiest time of her life a living hell. She didn't see a powerful matriarch anymore. She saw a hollow, frightened woman whose entire self-worth was dictated by the opinions of people who didn't actually care about her. "I don't work at the V&A anymore, Victoria," Madeline said calmly, her voice devoid of anger, which somehow made it infinitely colder. "Oh, and you cannot buy your way out of the cruelty you chose. You didn't hate my dress because it was ugly. You hated it because it didn't cost enough money to impress your friends. You hated me because I didn't care about the things you worship." "I can change," Victoria begged, stepping closer, reaching out a trembling hand. Liam slapped her hand away. "No, you can't. You're only apologizing because you got caught on the wrong side of power. If the palace hadn't intervened, you would still be laughing at her right now. Do not contact us again, Mother, I mean it. If you come near my wife again, I will bankrupt your hedge fund division myself." Liam took Madeline's hand, and they walked away, leaving Victoria Hayes standing alone in the cold London rain, completely broken by her own vanity. 2 weeks later, back in the secure labs of Buckingham Palace, Madeline made a discovery that would permanently cement the legacy of the gown. She was working on the interior corset structure, carefully securing the delicate, pale, blush pink lining where the stitching had begun to fray near the left rib cage. As she gently separated the layers of silk to re-anchor the thread, her fine-tipped tweezers scraped against something slightly stiff, hidden deep within the seam allowance. Frowning, Madeline adjusted her magnifying loupes. It wasn't boning, it felt like paper. Her heart began to race. In the world of historical garments, finding items hidden inside linings, coins for luck, small tokens, was rare but incredibly significant. She immediately called for Angela Kelly and the head conservator. Under their watchful, breathless supervision, Madeline used a microscopic scalpel to carefully open 2 inches of the original 1947 stitching. Using specialized flat-tipped forceps, she reached into the dark pocket of the silk and gently withdrew a tiny folded square of paper. It was a piece of heavily rationed, coarse, wartime parchment, deeply yellowed with age. Madeline placed it flat on the sterile glass of the examination table. The room was so silent, the hum of the climate control vents sounded like a jet engine. With trembling, gloved hands, Madeline unfolded the brittle paper. Written in faded, distinctively spidery fountain pen ink was a handwritten note. "To my dearest Lilibet, the world sees the heavy crown you are destined to wear, the Troteov, but today I only see my daughter. This silk was woven in secret, a father's quiet insurance against the uncertainties of our recovering world, to ensure nothing can tarnish your brightest day. May your marriage be as enduring as this fabric and your heart remain as steadfast as your duty. I am so profoundly proud of you. Papa." Madeline gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Angela Kelly let out a sharp, choked sob, pressing her hand against her chest. "Dear God," she whispered, tears spilling instantly over her cheeks. "It's from the King, King George VI. He hid a letter in the backup dress. He knew Sir Norman was making it. He hid it near her heart." The discovery was earth-shattering. The dress was no longer just a beautiful garment. It was a deeply intimate historical artifact capturing the profound love between a monarch and the daughter who would soon bear the weight of an empire. "We have to tell Her Majesty, immediately," Angela said, her voice shaking with emotion. She looked at Madeline, her eyes blazing with respect. "You found it, Madeline. For 70 years that letter slept in the dark. You brought it into the light." 6 months later, the doors of the Victoria and Albert Museum, partnering with the Royal Collection Trust for this unprecedented event, were thrown open for the most highly anticipated royal exhibition of the decade resilience and royalty, the hidden threads of 1947. The gala opening was the social event of the year, eclipsing any high society wedding or charity ball. The guest list was strictly controlled by the palace, a mix of international dignitaries, renowned historians, and senior royals. The atmosphere in the grand entry hall of the V&A was electric. Champagne flowed and a string quartet played softly from a sweeping balcony. But outside in the cold autumn air, a silent drama was unfolding. Victoria Hayes, wrapped in a dark mink coat, approached the velvet ropes at the bottom of the museum's grand staircase. She had spent the last 6 months in total social isolation. Her son had entirely cut contact. This gala, she believed in her desperate, fractured mind, was her final chance to publicly force a reconciliation and salvage her shattered reputation. She stepped up to the imposing security detail, holding the digitized guest list. "Victoria Hayes," she said, attempting to project her old aristocratic authority, though her voice trembled violently. "I am the mother-in-law of the head curator." The head of security, a massive, unsmiling former military officer, didn't even look down at his tablet. "I am aware of who you are, Mrs. Hayes. Your name is specifically on the restricted list. You are not permitted entry." Victoria flushed a deep, humiliating crimson. A few paparazzi lingering near the barriers turned their flashing cameras toward her. "This is absurd. My son is inside. I demand to speak to Liam." Before the security officer could call for backup, the heavy glass doors of the museum opened. Liam Hayes stepped out onto the landing, looking immaculate in a tailored tuxedo. He looked down the stone steps at his mother. Victoria's face lit up with desperate relief. "Liam, tell these brutes to let me in. The press is watching." Liam slowly walked down the steps, stopping just behind the velvet rope. He looked at the woman who raised him, feeling nothing but a profound, hollow pity. "They are doing exactly what I instructed them to do, Mother," Liam said quietly, his voice cutting through the chill air. "Liam, please," Victoria whispered, tears finally breaking through her meticulously maintained facade. "I have lost everything. Evelyn won't speak to me. The board forced me out. My friends treat me like a disease. I have nothing left. Please let me in. Let me stand with my family." "You don't understand what family is, Victoria," Liam replied, his tone final and unyielding. "You thought family was a brand. You thought it was a weapon to wield against people you deemed lesser. Madeline didn't take your friends away from you. She just exposed what your friendships were actually built on: vanity and cruelty." "I am your mother," she cried out. "And Madeline is my wife," Liam stated flatly. "And tonight is the greatest triumph of her life. I will not let you cast a single shadow over her light. Go home, Victoria. There's nothing for you here." Liam turned his back on her, walking up the grand staircase and back through the glowing doors of the museum, leaving his mother standing alone on the pavement, surrounded by the flashing bulbs of the paparazzi she had once used to try and destroy her daughter-in-law. Inside the central atrium of the V&A, the exhibition was breathtaking. At the very center of the hall, encased in a massive, specially climate-controlled cylinder of museum-grade glass, stood the gown. Bathed in soft, reverent fiber-optic lighting, the 1947 Hartnell masterpiece seemed to glow from within. The Honiton lace was pristine, the raw silk restored to its original breathtaking glory. Mounted on a velvet pedestal, directly beside the dress encased in its own protective glass, was the handwritten letter from King George VI, fully translated and displayed for the world to see. The crowd of dignitaries stood in hushed, awe-struck silence around the display. Liam found Madeline standing near the back of the room, watching the crowd interact with her work. She was dressed elegantly, but simply, in a midnight blue evening gown, her hair swept up her face, glowing with a quiet, undeniable confidence. She wasn't wearing a tiara tonight. She didn't need one. Liam wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You did this," he murmured. "You saved history." "We did," Madeline corrected softly, leaning back into his chest. If you hadn't stood by me against your family, I would have thrown that dress back into the charity bin." A hush fell over the room as the director of the Royal Collection Trust tapped a microphone at the podium set up near the display. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director announced, his voice echoing through the grand hall. "Tonight we do not just celebrate a dress, we celebrate the enduring power of history, the deep bonds of family, and the vital unseen work of those who preserve our past so we may learn from it in the present." He gestured toward Madeline. "I give you the woman who possessed the vision to see royalty hidden in the shadows, the brilliant head curator of this exhibition, Mrs. Madeline Hayes." The applause that erupted was thunderous, genuine, and deeply respectful. It wasn't the frantic, desperate clapping of the Sudeley Castle reception. It was the applause of peers, of historians, of people who understood the true magnitude of what she had accomplished. Madeline stepped forward, slipping her hand into Liam's as they walked toward the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces, then turned her gaze to the glowing glass case holding the heavy silk gown. She thought about the snickering in the bridal suite. She thought about Evelyn's cruel jokes and Victoria's venomous threats. She thought about the terrified girl she had been clutching a 50-pound charity shop bag in the London rain. That girl was gone, forged in the fires of high society cruelty and polished by the undeniable truth of history. Madeline had emerged unbroken. She stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady, clear, and ringing with absolute certainty. "History." Madeline began, her eyes sweeping the silent, captivated room. "It is rarely perfect. It is often faded, misunderstood, and discarded by those who only see the surface. But true worth is not determined by a price tag or by the loud opinions of those who confuse arrogance with class. True worth is built by hand. It is woven with love, stitched with resilience, and designed to withstand the test of time." She smiled, looking directly at Liam. "Sometimes the most priceless treasures in the world look like mistakes to those who don't know how to see. But if you have the courage to look closer, if you have the bravery to handle them with care, you might just find a masterpiece." The crowd erupted once more. Madeline stood in the light of the flashbulbs, the legacy of a queen standing proudly beside her, ready to face the future. What a journey! From a heartbreaking moment of public humiliation to an absolutely triumphant royal vindication. Madeline's incredible story proves that true worth can never be buried by shallow snobbery. She didn't just find a dress. She uncovered a priceless piece of history and exposed the hollow cruelty of the elite. If you loved watching a toxic mother-in-law get exactly what she deserved, while a true queen claimed her rightful place, smash that like button. Share this video with your friends and subscribe for more amazing true stories. Please drop a comment below. Would you have recognized the dress?